It began with a kind of electrified tension that even the most seasoned political observers could feel radiating through the air. A vibration of hostility and anticipation mingling into something almost tangible as cameras were trained on the ornate briefing room inside the White House. The backdrop was polished to perfection, the presidential seal gleaming like a silent witness to whatever would unfold. But beneath the glossy surface was an undercurrent so raw and volatile that every journalist present knew instinctively to choose their words carefully. Donald Trump stood at the podium, his posture rigid but his hands fidgeting ever so slightly with the edges of his notes, a gesture he often displayed before launching into one of his more unpredictable tirades. Outside, a late autumn wind rattled. The flagpoles and the heavy clouds above Washington seemed to press down on the city with an almost cinematic foreboding. Trump's eyes darted toward the reporters in the first row, scanning for anyone who might dare interrupt him. But the room was silent, save for the faint clicking of cameras and the low hum of the air conditioning. Everyone's mind was Denzel Washington, whose recent, unapologetically blunt interview on national television had set off a political storm unlike anything in recent memory. Denzel, in his sharp but measured cadence, had accused Trump of using the presidency not as a public service, but as a personal shield for corruption, invoking moments, names, and incidents that many had whispered about but few dared to articulate so publicly. It wasn't just the content of his words, it was the authority with which he spoke them. As if he had peered directly into the machinery of power and decided to describe every rusted cog for the public to see. For 3 days, Trump's allies scrambled to contain the fallout, flooding the airwaves with counter-narratives, smears, and carefully crafted talking points meant to discredit Denzel's credibility. But the strategy was faltering, and every hour that passed without a decisive counterstrike only seemed to embolden the story. But today, Trump was here to deliver that counterstrike, and as he gripped the podium, his voice dropped into a gravelly register that signaled a shift from bluster to outright aggression. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, pausing to let the silence stretch, "we are witnessing something in this country that we cannot allow: a celebrity using lies, dangerous lies, to attack your president and undermine the United States of America." He leaned in, his brows knitting into a hard line. "What Denzel Washington has done is nothing short of treason." The words hit the room like a crack of thunder, eliciting a collective, sharp inhale from the press corps. Treason. It was a term so loaded, so historically grave, that its casual deployment felt like a deliberate escalation into dangerous territory. Trump continued, his voice rising, accusing Denzel of working with enemies of the state, coordinating with foreign powers to smear the presidency, and inciting unrest that could destroy this nation from within. He demanded, in no uncertain terms, that federal authorities arrest Denzel Washington immediately. "I am calling on the Department of Justice, the FBI, and every law enforcement agency in this country to do their duty," he declared, stabbing the air with his index finger for emphasis. "Arrest him. Arrest him for treason before it's too late." The reporters began shouting questions, some incredulous, some almost disbelieving, as the gravity of what had just been said sank in. But then came the moment that would dominate headlines for days, a moment that took precisely 33 seconds to ignite. As Trump tried to speak over the noise, his complexion shifted from flushed to an alarming shade of crimson, his words stumbling into incoherence. The hand gripping the podium began to tremble. His free hand reached instinctively toward his chest as his breathing grew uneven. The cacophony in the room died instantly, replaced by a tense, stunned silence. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple as his eyes blinked rapidly, his mouth opening but no words emerging. One of his aides moved toward him, whispering something urgent, but Trump swatted the air as if fending off an invisible enemy. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every second, every twitch, every falter, and in living rooms across America, millions of viewers watched in real time as the most powerful man in the country seemed, for the first time, utterly powerless. 33 seconds after calling for Denzel Washington's arrest, Donald Trump was losing control live, unfiltered, and inescapably human. The seconds that followed seemed to elongate into an eternity, each tick of the clock a measured thud. Against the chest of every person in that room, the press, usually quick to pounce on any sign of weakness, was momentarily disarmed. It wasn't every day that the leader of the free world began visibly unraveling in front of them, their lenses and microphones capturing the precise collapse of composure. Trump's right hand braced harder against the podium, knuckles whitening, and his breathing became more labored, each inhale shallow and rasping, as though every breath required negotiation. The aide who had stepped forward, a young man in a navy suit with the taut, urgent expression of someone juggling both protocol and panic, murmured again for the president to step back. To take a break, but Trump waved him off more feebly this time. It was no longer the sharp, commanding dismissal of a man in control. It was the erratic swat of someone grappling with the realization that control was slipping through his fingers like sand. From the back of the room, a reporter's voice rose cautiously. "Mr. President, are you all right?" The question, simple yet loaded, seemed to puncture whatever thin veil of defiance Trump was clinging to. His mouth opened as if to respond, but instead, a strained, half-swallowed gasp escaped, followed by a momentary glaze in his eyes that sent another ripple of unease through the room. The aide made a decisive move then, stepping fully into the camera's frame, speaking in rapid, clipped tones to someone out of sight. In the same breath, two members of the Secret Service emerged from the shadows of the sidewall, their presence immediate and imposing. One reached discreetly for Trump's elbow, while the other's gaze swept the room, assessing exits, calculating risks, and silently communicating to the press corps that this situation was no longer a standard political event. It was a containment operation. But the cameras kept rolling. Networks across the country were broadcasting the scene in real time, and on social media, clips were already going viral. The 33-second mark stamped with captions ranging from concern to open ridicule. In living rooms, diners, bars, and on the small screens clutched in commuters' hands, the image of Donald Trump faltering under the weight of his own pronouncements was spreading faster than any press release could hope to counteract. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in Los Angeles, Denzel Washington was in the middle of a charity luncheon when his phone began to buzz with an unrelenting urgency. Text after text poured in, friends, colleagues, journalists, each one, some variation of turn on the news. Now, when he finally did, the footage was already in heavy rotation. Trump. Rigid and flushed, words dissolving into incomprehensible fragments. Aides swarming, reporters craning forward, the scene crackling with a mixture of disbelief and inevitability. Denzel didn't smile, though there was a flicker in his eyes, a flash of recognition that whatever had just happened was bigger than any counterattack he could have mounted himself. He watched, unblinking. As the chyron blared across the bottom of the screen, Trump demands Denzel's arrest for treason, loses control, 33 seconds. Later, the juxtaposition was so striking, it bordered on surreal, the kind of narrative beats screenwriters might reject for being too on the nose. Back in Washington, the White House communications team was scrambling, their phones exploding with calls from allies, reporters, and donors demanding explanations. Some insisted they spin it as a minor health episode, fatigue, dehydration, perhaps the flu, anything to project resilience. Others argued for a total blackout until they could assess the political damage. But the reality was already out there, immutable and replayable at the touch of a screen. Every angle of his falter was preserved, dissected, and analyzed, from the way his hand trembled to the exact moment his voice gave way. In that instant, the story was no longer about Denzel Washington's alleged treason. It was about the undeniable, televised fragility of a president who had built his brand on dominance. And as the footage looped endlessly, the public's attention shifted not to the allegations against Denzel, but to the unsettling image of Trump diminished before their eyes. A man who could summon all the trappings of power, yet not the steadiness to hold them. In the hours after the footage first aired, the political landscape shifted with a speed and ferocity that even veteran analysts found dizzying. Cable news networks ran continuous split-screen coverage. On one side, the 33 seconds that would become the defining visual of the day. On the other, panels of commentators dissecting every frame as if they were examining evidence in a high-profile trial. Theories multiplied like wildfire. Was it a mini-stroke, a panic attack, a sudden onset of some undisclosed condition? The White House issued a terse statement claiming the president had been momentarily unwell due to low blood sugar and was resting comfortably, but few were convinced. Across the aisle, Trump's political opponents seized the moment with ruthless efficiency, framing his visible breakdown as proof that the country was being led by a man both unfit and unhinged. Senate Minority Leader's statement landed like a hammer. When the commander-in-chief calls for the arrest of an American citizen without cause, and within seconds is unable to stand on his own, we must question not only his judgment, but his capacity to serve. The comment ricocheted across social media, trending alongside hashtags that paired Trump's name with words like #unfit, #33 seconds, and #treasonous collapse. Denzel, for his part, had maintained a measured silence throughout the day, fielding dozens of interview requests, but declining them all until just after sundown. When he emerged outside the venue of a gala in downtown Los Angeles and approached a knot of reporters who had been camped there since morning, cameras snapped furiously as he stepped up to the microphones. His expression calm, almost serene, yet edged with the quiet authority that had made his earlier accusations land so heavily. "I have no intention of trading insult for insult," he began, his voice steady enough to cut through the din of the press. "What happened today is not about meats, about the truth, the responsibility of leadership, and the danger of weaponizing words like treason against your own citizens." He paused, letting the weight of the word hang in the air before continuing. "The President of the United States accused me of a crime punishable by death." 33 seconds later, he showed the entire world that even the most powerful office cannot protect a man from the truth catching up with him. His words, clipped and deliberate, were broadcast live on multiple networks, and within minutes, clips of his statement were flooding every major platform. Commentators noted how effortlessly he reframed the narrative, shifting it from a personal attack to a national reckoning on integrity and abuse of power. Even some of Trump's staunchest supporters found themselves uncomfortably silent. The footage of their leader faltering had planted a seed of doubt too visible to ignore. Meanwhile, inside the West Wing, the mood was one of siege. Advisors huddled in dimly lit offices, whispering about contingency plans and whether the president should be seen in public again before a full medical evaluation. Some feared that any absence would fuel speculation. Others warned that another on-camera appearance could be catastrophic if his health faltered again. Outside, protesters had begun to gather, some chanting for Trump's resignation, others carrying signs declaring, "We stand with Denzel," in bold hand-painted letters. The air around the White House was charged, not just with political outrage, but with the sense that something foundational had shifted. It was no longer about a celebrity criticizing a president, nor about the president retaliating. It was about the fragility of power laid bare in front of millions, and the way a mere half-minute could eclipse years of cultivated image. And as the night deepened over Washington, with helicopters circling and the glow of camera lights flickering against the iron gates, one truth became inescapable. The next move would define not just the survival of a presidency, but the trajectory of the nation itself.